Wild hair, front brows, the most recognizable face in music history. But what if I told you that half of Beethoven's portraits are simply made up? In this video, I'll sort 20 of his most famous portraits to separate the truth from lies. In the first tier, the imaginary portraits, artistic representations of Beethoven made after his death. In the second one, the dubious portraits, including possible misattributions or falsifications. In the third tier, authentic historical portraits that weren't made from life. And finally, the historical portraits for which Beethoven actually sit. Let's get to it. Number 1. In theory, the earliest portrait of Beethoven. Is it? We don't really know. This painting was rediscovered in 1952 at an auction in the German city of Braunschweig. On the back of the canvas and the lower part of the frame, several inscriptions indicated that the child in this portrait was Beethoven at 13, and that the painting had belonged to one of Beethoven's closest friends, Nikolaus Smeskal. However, it's been proved that those inscriptions were added several years later, and nothing else links this portrait to Beethoven except maybe the big dark eyes. The light brown hair is another matter of concern, as Beethoven is usually depicted with pitch black hair, and overall, the kid in this portrait doesn't look like 13 either. Number 2. Engraving of Beethoven at around 30. Authentic or falsification? It's an authentic copy. This is part of a series of engravings commissioned by Viennese music publishers in 1801, when Beethoven was starting to become very famous. The reference for all of them was a lost original drawing by Gandolf Steinhauser von Treuberg.
Gandolf Ernst Steinhauser von Treuberg.
A second engraving was made by Karl Riedel, which is almost identical, as you can see here. Number 3. Wait a moment, you again? In case you're wondering, this is not the lost portrait by Treuberg. In the internet sources, this painting is usually attributed to Riedel, but neither the author or the date have been confirmed by the experts. The relation between this painting and the previously shown engravings is quite obvious, but we don't really know which one came first, and some have even suggested this could be a post-Beethoven falsification. For now, this portrait remains as dubious. Number 4. The good guy Beethoven. This miniature portrait was made by the Danish painter Christian Horneman during a visit to Vienna in 1802. 1 year later, Beethoven sent it to his school-day friend Stefan von Breunig as a gift of reconciliation. Number 5. The Give Me 5 Beethoven, one of the most famous portraits of the young Beethoven in theory. The portrait was made by Joseph Mahler when Beethoven was at the peak of his public success as pianist, and it's considered the only authentic portrait that shows his whole body. In case you're wondering, the instrument here is a lyre guitar, a popular instrument among the upper classes of that period that was often used as an allegorical representation of the music and the classicist ideals. Beethoven was so fond on this portrait that he kept it until his death. There is also an anonymous copy that was made a few years later and is now located at the New York's Public Library. Number 6. Who the heck is this? This is considered an authentic portrait, but it wasn't made from life. The work was commissioned by Beethoven's patron, the Prince Karl von Lichnowsky, to the German painter Isidor Neugas. A few versions of the portrait were made in Neugas' workshop, one of them acquired by the Hungarian Brunswick family. For some reason in this version, they decided to include a chain for their reading glasses. Number 7. Beethoven staring into your soul. Is this one authentic? Yes, and it has two different authors. Let me explain. During the Congress of Vienna in 1814, the young French artist Louis-René Letron was commissioned to create a drawing of Beethoven which was supposed to serve as draft for a copper engraving. However, when the engraver Blasius Huffel saw the results, he was very displeased and asked Beethoven to sit again for him. Huffel corrected Letron's drawing on the spot and then proceeded to make the engraving after it. Curiously enough, Beethoven was actually very satisfied with the final version. Since then, Huffel's engraving has been used multiple times as reference for other paintings. Number 8. Beethoven in the woods, probably thinking of his next symphony. Too good to be real? Yes, of course. This painting was made by Julius Schmidt in the 20th century. Keep in mind that outdoor portraits weren't really a thing until mid-19th century with the introduction of paint tubes. Some of the best imaginary illustrations of Beethoven's life have also been made by Schmidt, and I regard them as highly interesting works despite being purely fictional. Number 9. Beethoven in the Morning. This portrait was also made by Joseph Mahler, the same guy who had already painted Beethoven 10 years before. The portrait was commissioned by one of Beethoven's friends, Ignaz von Gleisenstein, and it was completed between 1814 and 1815. At least 2 more versions of the portrait had been made before, and the painter kept the last one for himself. Number 10. Just another beautiful portrait of the master. And yes, it's authentic, according to the experts. The problem with this portrait is the lack of information. Apparently it was commissioned by the piano maker Streicher in Vienna, but it's uncertain whether it was made from life or not. In my opinion, the lower part of the face looks very similar to the other authentic portraits. However, the eyes and the hair, not so much. Let me know what you think in the comments. A lost second version of this painting was created by the same artist the following year. This is the lithography made after it many years later. Number 11. One of the most famous portraits of Beethoven. And this one is, of course, pure invention. This painting was made by Carl Jäger around 1870 using the black and white Geiser technique, and it was first published in the book Gallery of German Musicians. Number 12. Pencil drawing of Beethoven. Another well-known portrait of Beethoven, but I don't know what to think anymore. This one is considered authentic, but not from life. The painter August von Kluber made this drawing in the summer of 1818. Beethoven didn't sit for it, but he got to see the work later, and apparently he praised it for its great likeness. A chalk drawing by the same artist was created several years later after the pencil drawing. Number 13. Beethoven at dawn in his study, the most dramatic portrait of Beethoven ever. And no, there is no way Beethoven or anyone else would allow to be portrayed in such a depressing manner. Number 14. The Who's There? Beethoven. What? Okay, while this portrait is actually considered authentic by most scholars, we cannot ignore one big problem with regard to the sources. In 1819, the painter Ferdinand Schimann was invited to make a portrait of Beethoven by one of his closest friends, Anton Schindler. At first, Beethoven was not open to the proposal and refused to sit, so Schimann was forced to paint him while he was composing until they finally convinced him to cooperate. This version of the story was confirmed by Anton Schindler himself and the conversation books that Beethoven was using at that time because of his hearing loss. The problem is that all these references to the painter Simmons in the conversation books are fake, and they were falsified by no other than Anton Schindler, who also happened to be the one in possession of this painting after Beethoven's death. For these reasons, it can be assumed that Schindler made up the whole story to make the portrait look more authentic than it really was and increase its value this way. This doesn't necessarily mean that the portrait is fake too, but until further evidences appear, I'll consider it dubious. Number 15. Beethoven conducting. I really love this one, so I had to include it. This one was made in the 20th century by the Bulgarian painter Mikhail Katsarov as part of a series of 36 paintings depicting the life of Beethoven. As reference, Katsarov used this mask made by Franz Klein in 1812, formerly thought to be the Beethoven's death mask. So, ironically, Katsarov's pictures are very solid with regard to likeness. Number 16. Beethoven's default skin. This is by far the most popular portrait of the composer and probably the one that has affected the most how we think of him. But is it real? Yes, it is. The portrait was made by Joseph Karl Stiller in 1820 and required a total of 4 sessions because Beethoven was unable to sit still. On his hands we can see the beginning of the credo from his Missa Solemnis. Number 17. Sideways Beethoven. Real or not? This imaginary portrait was made in 1926 by Wilhelm Fassbender, and in my opinion it was heavily influenced by the famous unfinished portrait of Mozart. Fassbender was also the author of this horrific copy of the Stilla portrait. Number 18. The Mature Beethoven. A fine piece of art, but is it authentic as well? In 1823, the painter Ferdinand Weissmuller was commissioned by the Leipzig publishers Breitkopf und Härtel to make a portrait of Beethoven. Unluckily for Weissmuller, Beethoven wasn't in the mood for portraits, so the sitting session was abruptly interrupted and the artist was forced to finish the hair and the body by memory. A more polished second version was completed by Weissmuller later on, but it was destroyed in 1943 during the bombing of Leipzig in the context of the Second World War. Number 19. Grandpa Ludwig. If this one is authentic, it would be the last portrait of Beethoven alive. And it is. This lesser-known work was made by Stefan Decca in 1824, only 3 years before Beethoven's death. And number 20. The Grand Finale. Okay, this one is just too creepy to be real, right? This portrait was made by Joseph Tannhäuser in Beethoven's apartment, soon after his death on March 1827. It was meant to serve as visual memento for those who paid their last respects to the deceased in his apartment the following days, as Beethoven's face and body were kept fully covered by blankets all the time. So this is our final list. How many did you guess right? That's all for today. Let me know if this video was helpful and see you next time.